Thank you for joining your desert frontiersman Alan on another collection of lost gold stories to relax or drive to. Please leave a like or comment. For further desert romps, hit the subscribe button. Welcome listeners to another episode of the Southwest Desert. Today, we'll be exploring the intriguing tale of the Lost Yuma Gold Ledge, a fabled Apache gold mine whose secret was disclosed to only one white man before his untimely and mysterious demise. Our story begins with a 1940s discovery of a badly rusted Colt revolver in the rugged Aravaipa country near the former Fort Grant in Arizona. This weathered relic of the Wild West frontier is believed by many to be a tantalizing clue connected to the Lost Yuma Ledge. Legend has it that long before the infamous Apache leader Geronimo and his band of warriors were finally captured and confined to a reservation, this incredibly rich gold deposit was discovered and jealously guarded by the Apache. The secret of the mine's location was revealed to a single white man, a former graduate of the prestigious West Point Military Academy. His true identity has been obscured by the sands of time, and he is known to history only by the moniker Yuma. This nickname stemmed from his prior posting as an acting quartermaster at Fort Yuma along the banks of the Colorado River. However, Yuma's once promising military career was cut short in scandal and disgrace. Accused of accounting irregularities, he faced a court-martial and was unceremoniously discharged from the army. Shunned by his former comrades and haunted by the stain on his honor, Yuma sought refuge among the Yuma tribe under the leadership of Chief Pasquale. He quickly ingratiated himself with his new hosts and took up the life of a trader, making frequent trips with his Yuma wife into neighboring Apache territory. It was during Yuma's trading missions with the Aravaipa Apache that he first caught wind of hushed rumors about an astonishingly rich gold ledge from which the tribe sourced nuggets and raw ore to barter for crucial supplies. Determined to uncover the whereabouts of this mineral treasure, Yuma doggedly worked to gain the trust and confidence of the Apache chief. After much cajoling and persuasion, Yuma finally convinced the chief to reveal the carefully guarded secret, promising him a rifle, ammunition, and various trinkets in exchange. The two men soon set off on horseback from the main Apache encampment, riding north across the rugged hills. About 9 arduous miles later, Yuma and his native guide arrived at a long ridge situated between the San Pedro River Valley to the east and a narrow, rocky canyon terminating just west of their vantage point. There, in a crater-like depression before them, an outcropping of rose quartz glittered with the unmistakable gleam of raw gold. Yuma used his hunting knife to carefully pry loose a fist-sized chunk of the brittle ore, marveling at the way the coarse gold sparkled in the bright morning sun. After securing a few choice samples, the two men took great pains to cover the exposed quartz with dirt and loose stones, erasing any obvious signs of the mineral wealth hidden just below the surface. Though certainly no expert miner, Yuma's experience was enough for him to recognize that the Apache chief had led him to an extraordinarily rich lode. He also knew all too well that the tribe would guard their golden secret with lethal force if he were ever foolish enough to return uninvited. Concluding his business in Aravaipa territory a few days later, Yuma made his way to Tucson. There, he presented the gold-streaked rose quartz samples to an old army acquaintance, a merchant and freighter by the name of Crittenden, whom Yuma remembered from his Fort Yuma days. Astounded by the quality of the ore, Crittenden quickly agreed to partner with Yuma on a clandestine expedition to the Apache stronghold. Their plan was to thoroughly explore the ledge and extract more substantial samples to help guide their future actions. And so, late one afternoon, the unlikely pair of prospectors set out on horseback from the dusty pueblo of Tucson. They rode through the night, arriving just after sunrise at Old Fort Grant. After a few hours of rest for both men and mounts, Yuma and Crittenden resumed their trek, turning north to follow the San Pedro River downstream. Roughly 10 miles of hard riding brought them to a secluded spot along the riverbank thick with brush, an ideal location to make camp and wait for daybreak. As the first rays of morning light spilled across the rugged landscape, the two men broke camp, crossed the river, and began the steep ascent up the western mountainside. The rocky, broken terrain soon forced them to dismount and laboriously lead the horses along a faint, twisting trail. Upon reaching the long ridge, Yuma first visited with the Apache chief. The unlikely partners quickly located the camouflaged quartz ledge. Yuma and Crittenden unearthed 25 to 30 pounds of the gold-rich ore. Placing their precious cargo in a sack and taking great care to once again hide any evidence of the unworked mine, the men cached their tools and cautiously surveyed the surrounding wilderness for any signs of hostile Apache warriors. Confident they had avoided detection, Yuma and Crittenden mounted up and picked their way down the far side of the mountain, descending its steep, cactus-studded flanks and emerging into the scorching desert below. They pushed their horses hard through the baking heat of the day and the chill of the night, arriving back in Tucson early the next morning, having encountered no roving war parties. The triumphant yet weary prospectors processed their sack of ore by pulverizing the quartz with a mortar and pestle. To their astonishment and delight, this initial test batch yielded an impressive $1,200 worth of placer gold, a fortune in those days. However, Yuma and Crittenden were shrewd enough to recognize that the Apache, already stirred up and on the warpath, would present a deadly obstacle to any immediate attempts to work the remote claim. And so the two men agreed to temporarily pursue their regular livelihoods and bide their time until a safer opportunity presented itself. Yuma resumed his backcountry trading operations while Crittenden returned to his freighting business, hauling supplies between the various army forts and far-flung mining camps. Loading up his pack mules with trade goods and supplies, Yuma bid farewell to Tucson, setting out with his Yuma wife on the long overland journey to the Papago tribal lands. Unbeknownst to either of them, this would prove to be the last time their friends and associates would ever see the couple alive. According to tribal oral histories, somewhere in the forbidding wilderness of Growler Pass north of Quitobafuita, Yuma and his wife had the misfortune of encountering a band of renegade Apache. This splinter group, comprised of warriors violently opposed to the reservation system, mercilessly cut down the pair of travelers. When their bodies were later discovered by a party of Papago scouts, the slain couple was respectfully buried in the shadow of the Growler Mountains, their lonely graves marked by simple piles of stones which endure to this day, a poignant memorial to two lives cut tragically short. The cairns can still be seen just a stone's throw from the old wagon road which meanders through the pass and down to the remote oasis of Cipriano Wells by the Mexican border. As the months slipped by with no word from his former partner, an increasingly concerned Crittenden came to the inescapable conclusion that some dark fate must have befallen Yuma and his bride. Grimly accepting that he was now the last living white soul to know the location of the fabulously rich gold ledge, Crittenden steeled his resolve and prepared to return to the hidden mine alone. Astride a swift and sturdy mount, his saddle festooned with a repeating rifle and a brace of Colt revolvers, the determined freighter quietly left Tucson. Crittenden rode hard all that day and much of the ensuing night, once again arriving at Fort Grant where he paused just long enough to rest and re-provision before saddling up and continuing his solitary quest. When a trio of cavalry officers noted Crittenden's arrival and inquired as to his business in the area, the tight-lipped freighter reluctantly revealed the purpose behind his journey into Apache lands. Alarmed by his intentions, the soldiers attempted to dissuade Crittenden from his course of action, warning him of the extreme peril he would face. But whether through stubbornness, greed, or a fatal combination of the two, Crittenden ignored their dire predictions and words of caution. With a terse farewell, he mounted his horse and spurred the animal toward the north and his long-awaited rendezvous with destiny. When several days passed with no sign of Crittenden's return, the commander of Fort Grant dispatched a patrol to search for the overdue prospector. Following his back trail down the San Pedro, the cavalry troopers discovered the freighter's horse wandering riderless some 10 miles south of the post. On the verge of perishing from thirst, the loyal animal was still fully saddled and bridled, its reins dangling and stirrups empty. Of Crittenden himself, there was no sign, no trace to be found. Did he successfully relocate the camouflaged ledge only to be ambushed by the vengeful Apache as he worked the exposed vein? Or perhaps he fell victim to the harsh, unforgiving nature of the Sonoran Desert. The discovery in later years of a rusting rifle on the edge of the desert flats below the mountains, coupled with the 1940s find of an antique Colt revolver in the same general vicinity, strongly suggests that Crittenden met his end either through misadventure or at the hands of the Apache whose golden secret he had helped to purloin. In the decades following Crittenden's disappearance, the Apache maintained their stony silence regarding the lost mine. It is highly doubtful that any such hereditary secrets have survived the passage of time at all. And so the mystery of the Lost Yuma Gold Ledge endures, a lode of staggering potential wealth concealed somewhere in the rugged foothills of the Aravaipa country. Like so many of the legendary lost mines which continue to haunt our collective imagination, this desert mirage of unimaginable riches has long since vanished in the mists of time, leaving behind only a few intriguing clues and unanswered questions to taunt and beguile the ever-hopeful, those who still dream of striking it rich with the mother lode of the Southwest. Welcome to the Southwest Desert, a channel that explores lost tales and hidden riches in the American Southwest. In today's episode, we'll recount the intriguing story of the lost Golden Eagle Mine, a rich gold deposit allegedly discovered and lost over a century ago in California's unforgiving Death Valley region. Our story begins in the blistering summer of 1902, when a grizzled old prospector by the colorful name of Alkali Jones set out on an arduous trek from Skidoo, California, to Searchlight, Nevada. Jones's route would take him straight through Death Valley, a punishing landscape that the local Shoshone Native Americans ominously referred to as "to-me sha," ground on fire. Packing light for the grueling journey ahead, the seasoned desert rat loaded up his soul-pack burro with the bare essentials: a small rifle, prospecting gear, jerky, hardtack, and a precious gallon of water. Little did he know that fate had more in store for him than a difficult crossing of the scorching desert valley. 2 days into his expedition, Jones found himself suddenly enveloped by a relentless sandstorm. Blinded by flying grit that stung like tiny daggers, he stumbled ahead until he spotted a welcome refuge, a solitary butte rising from the valley floor, its base ringed by huge granite boulders. Gratefully, the weary traveler made camp in the partial shelter of the rocks and waited out the raging storm. When the skies finally cleared, Jones's curiosity drew him up the slopes of the little butte to survey his surroundings. About halfway up the north face, an unusual sight stopped him in his tracks. The hillside was littered with chunks of milky white quartz rock. Excitedly chipping at the quartz with his pick, the old prospector discovered that the stone was shot through with substantial veins of glittering gold. Jones had stumbled upon an outcropping of a white quartz vein roughly 3 feet wide, cutting through the butte's pink granite and visibly rich in gold along its 1,000-foot length before disappearing beneath the sand. Knowing he had found something special, Alkali Jones hastily filled out a claim form, christening his discovery the Golden Eagle Mine, after a huge bird he spotted circling overhead. Placing the notice in a tin can monument, he gathered up 10 pounds of the gleaming quartz as samples before continuing his journey. Late that afternoon, the prospector trekked a mile north to the foothills of the towering Funeral Mountains. Climbing upwards, he paused to rest and consult his map, realizing he was perched high on Coffin Mountain, gazing down at the shimmering salt flats of Death Valley. His water nearly gone, Jones observed the mesmerizing spectacle of a mirage filling the basin below with illusory lakes and castles. But Alkali was no greenhorn to be fooled by desert mirages. Wisely, he turned his back on the deceptive valley and hiked deeper into the mountains, where he soon encountered a deep, promising canyon. Standing at the rim, he noted doves and quail flying upstream into the ravine, a clear sign of water. His hunch paid off a mile further in, where he discovered a deep tank of fresh water scooped into the bedrock, surrounded by thousands of birds. Jones gratefully made camp nearby in a sandy hollow beneath a rocky overhang. That night, the old prospector lay awake with visions of his bonanza discovery dancing through his head, the cries of coyotes and owls echoing off the canyon walls. At first light, he filled his canteen, grabbed his sack of rich ore samples, and set off hiking to the east, aiming to resupply in the boom camps of Nevada. After an arduous passage through the Funeral and Amargosa ranges, Alkali Jones finally strode into Searchlight, Nevada, clutching his Golden Eagle ore. He promptly had a 1-pound sample assayed, which yielded an astonishing $41,000 in gold per ton, a princely sum in those days. The grinning prospector had the rest of the quartz crushed, netting him $180 in placer gold. With his poke now full of cash, Jones hurried to outfit a proper pack string, buying 3 burros and supplies for an extended stint working his incredible find. Over meals at a local eatery, he regaled other miners with his tale and proudly showed off the ore that was making him a rich man. After posting a letter to his sister back east, the old-timer packed up his animals and rode off toward the Crescent Peak area, planning to resupply at some camps there before returning to his mine in Death Valley. But that was the last anyone ever saw of old Alkali Jones. He made his final stop at a mine on the flank of Crescent Peak before passing through Good Springs and vanishing into the desert. When Jones failed to write again, his worried sister traveled west to search for her missing brother, but no trace of him was ever found. Years later, Shoshone Native Americans crossing the desert east of the Funeral Range stumbled upon the weathered remnants of a burro pack rig, scattered beneath a gnarled mesquite tree. Rusted mining tools lay half-buried in the sand nearby, but there was no sign of Alkali Jones himself. Speculation holds that he likely ran out of water somewhere in the vast, dry reaches between the Amargosa River and the Funerals, and set off on foot in a desperate attempt to relocate the spring he'd found on his outbound journey. Whether he succumbed to the merciless desert heat or met some other untimely end, his fate remains a mystery to this day. As for Jones's lost Golden Eagle mine, some believe it may have been reclaimed by the shifting sands, as fierce winds have been known to bury other rich lodes in the Death Valley area. With luck, perhaps those same desert gales might one day lay bare its fabulous riches again. Or maybe, just maybe, some fortunate prospector will rediscover Alkali Jones's incredible vein of gold, hidden for decades in this harshest and most unforgiving of landscapes. One thing is certain. The legend of the Lost Eagle Mine and the secret of its location died with the ill-fated Alkali Jones, but the promise of its wealth continues to lure hopeful treasure seekers to brave the unforgiving wastelands of Death Valley, where the ground itself burns with the reflected heat of untold riches. Welcome to another episode of the Southwest Desert. In today's episode, we'll be diving into the captivating legend of Padre Miguel Diaz and the lost treasure of Sonora in southern Arizona. Our story begins in the early 18th century, as Padre Diaz and his Native American guides gazed down from a high pass in the Agua Dulce Mountains. Below them stretched the lush, green valley of the Sonora. A crystal-clear stream gushed from the foot of a mountain, meandering for miles across the plain before finally disappearing into the desert sands. Deer and antelope peacefully grazed the grassy meadows or rested beneath shady trees lining the stream banks. To the east, the imposing form of Montezuma Peak atop the Ajo Range stood eternal watch over the highlands. Padre Diaz was immediately taken by the valley's serene beauty. He decided then and there to establish a mission in this idyllic spot. After a night encamped at Sonora, the party made haste back across the desert to St. George Bay. There, the clipper ship that had borne Diaz all the way from Spain bobbed at anchor, awaiting their return. Supplies were unloaded onto the beach, then strapped to the backs of waiting Native Americans for the arduous trek to Sonora. Once preparations were complete, scores of eager Papago tribesmen were hired to craft adobe bricks and excavate trenches for the mission church's rock foundations. The Papago in the area were only too happy to assist with the work. Day after day, week after week, the church walls gradually rose higher, until after many months of tireless labor, the whitewashed structure stood proudly completed. Adjacent to the church, in the center of a hollow square, a spacious and airy residence was built for Padre Diaz, replete with every comfort and refinement. Surrounding it was an arched cloister, providing a shady walkway encircling the entire enclosure. Just to the east lay a 5-acre garden, while high walls were erected around all the buildings as protection against marauding Apaches. Further south, fronting the mission, a large square plaza took shape, bordered by orderly rows of peon houses. When viewed from the hills, the immaculate white church and buildings made for a stunning sight against the desert backdrop, unlike anything the Papago had ever witnessed. A trench carried fresh water from the river to supply the bathing chambers and washing vats. Exploration parties soon made exciting discoveries. Rich veins of gold quartz and placer deposits a mere few leagues south in the San Francisco mountains. An adobe smelter was swiftly constructed near the mission church, and crews of men set to work, panning the gravel and excavating the lucrative quartz lodes. The raw ore was smelted on-site into solid gold bars, while any nuggets and dust from the placer mining were carefully collected in sturdy buckskin bags. All of this precious metal was then securely stashed away in a secret vault dug beneath the very floor of the mission itself. As the years went by, Padre Diaz prospered greatly from his mining and ranching enterprises. Once annually, a pack train would set out on the long journey to Mexico City, laden with 1/5 of the year's gold production as tribute to the King of Spain, the Royal Fifth, as it was known. The aging Padre, his girth steadily increasing, took to spending most of his time lounging in the cool shade of his grapevines, reading scripture or strolling about the flourishing mission gardens. Each year, 4 of the most beautiful young Papago maidens were selected to attend to the padre's household, some preparing meals while others waited on him and kept his quarters tidy. Older women tended the orchards heavy with pomegranates, peaches, figs, and all manner of succulent fruits thriving in the valley's rich soil and warm sunshine. However, as Padre Diaz's wealth and power grew, so too did his tyranny over the Papago people. They chafed under his oppressive rule, lamenting the long hours of toil in stiflingly hot mines and fields. Their women wore their fingers to the bone, grinding endless bushels of corn and wheat into tortillas to feed the hungry laborers. While outwardly peaceful, inwardly the Papagos seethed with resentment, their hearts hardening against the religion and people who had subjugated them so harshly. Although they had grown to love the beautiful white jewel of a mission nestled in their valley oasis, the Papago could no longer bear the Padres' heavy-handed dominion over their lives. In secret, they hatched a plot to violently overthrow their colonial overlords and win back their freedom. That fateful morning finally arrived in the spring of 1750. As the mission bells pealed out their call to prayer in the pre-dawn darkness, Montezuma Peak greeted the rising sun on the eastern horizon. The sweet scent of peach blossoms perfumed the air while small groups of Native American men, shoulders draped in blankets despite the warmth, made their way towards Sonora Mission. Curiously, not a single woman joined them. Once the church was packed with warriors, the chief gave a signal. As one, the men reached beneath their robes and drew out war tomahawks. Padre Diaz and his 2 visiting priest friends from Altar Mission were brutally cut down where they stood at the altar. Their lifeless bodies were unceremoniously tossed into the gold vault before the assassins methodically tore down the church walls and roof. Sonora Mission, which had stood for decades as a symbol of Spanish colonialism, was reduced to ruins in mere hours. News of the massacre spread like wildfire, igniting uprisings across the region. The Caborca missionaries were slain, while Beac and Guevavi were sacked and deserted. As for the lucrative Santa Lucia mine, its entrance was hastily concealed beneath logs and earth, never to be rediscovered. Many years later, as he lay on his deathbed at the ripe old age of 128, a Papago elder known as Dr. Juan unburdened his conscience of a secret he had zealously guarded for over a century. The old man recounted how, as a young boy, he often played amongst the crumbling remnants of Sonora Mission. One day, following a particularly heavy rain, he noticed what appeared to be a cement slab with an iron ring set into it. Curiosity piqued. He cleared the mud from its edges and gave the ring a solid tug. To his amazement, the slab lifted away to reveal a dark staircase plunging into the depths below. Descending the slick steps, Dr. Juan found himself in a small subterranean chamber. There in the corner, a neat stack of solid gold bars glinted in the weak light. Arranged on top sat several ancient leather sacks, some rotted through to spill their contents of gold nuggets and dust onto the stone floor. But it was the far side of the room that gave the boy pause and chilled him to his core. There, 3 leering human skulls perched atop jumbled piles of bones, all that remained of Padre Diaz and his fellow priests. After that chilling discovery, Dr. Juan had fled in terror, hastily recovering the hidden entrance. He kept the existence of the gold and its macabre guardians, a closely guarded secret for the rest of his long life, never breathing a word to a single soul. Local legends hold that on rainy nights, eerie lights flicker and dance amidst the weather-beaten remnants of the old mission, leading superstitious Papago to shun the sight. Among both Native Americans and Mexicans, such ghostly illuminations are considered a sure sign of buried riches. And so there the legendary cache remains to this day, heaps of gleaming gold bars and leather bags slowly surrendering their priceless contents to the unyielding march of time. Untold fortunes in dust and nuggets gradually accumulating across the cold cobblestones, eternally guarded by three long-dead alleged holy men. The lost treasure of Sonora Mission, concealed from the world for centuries, patiently awaits the day some lucky soul finally solves the riddle of its location and claims Padre Diaz's glittering legacy as their own. Join us next time as we go in search of more fascinating tales lost in the mists of time. Welcome to the Southwest Desert, a channel that explores the fascinating stories, legends, and mysteries of the Southwest Desert. In today's episode, we'll be diving into the intriguing tale of the Lost Organ Grinder's Ledge, a story that has captivated treasure hunters and history buffs for generations. Was it a genuine lost gold mine of incredible richness, or just another tall tale spun around the campfires of old Arizona? The story of the Lost Organ Grinder's Ledge was first recounted by an old Arizona desert rat and prospector named Bill Bear. Bear was a colorful character, a longtime prospector, trapper, and a squaw man, a white man married to a Native American woman. In his later years, he shared a remarkable tale, claiming it took place back in the early 1860s, the early days of the Arizona Territory. According to Bear, 3 Italian organ grinders were making the long overland journey from the Colorado River town of La Paz to Granite Creek near the territorial capital of Prescott. Organ grinders were a common sight in those days, roving musicians who wandered from town to town earning meager coins with their music. These men each had a small hand-cranked street organ and a trained monkey that would collect tips from onlookers. As Bear told it, the 3 Italians paused one scorching day to rest in the shade of a mesquite tree. There, they found an old Mojave Native American collapsed on the ground, nearly dead from heat and thirst. Taking pity on the man, the Italians shared precious water from their canteens and what little food they could spare. The Native American was deeply grateful for the kindness these strangers had shown him. In halting Spanish, he told the organ grinders he wanted to repay them by showing them the location of an incredibly rich gold mine. The Italians were initially hesitant, questioning the old Mojave about how valuable this mine could really be. In response, he simply bent down, scooped up a fistful of pebbles from the desert floor, and declared mucho, mucho oro, lo mismo esta, as he swept his arm out towards the horizon, indicating the mine was as full of gold as the ground was full of rocks, and that the deposit was a massive one. That was all the Italians needed to hear. They quickly gathered their belongings and prepared to follow the old Mojave deep into the wilderness. He led them on a challenging 2-day march across the blazing Arizona desert, until they finally reached the Santa Maria River. On the 3rd day, they entered a small, deep canyon in the hills north of Peoples Valley. At their destination, they found a spring of fresh, clean water trickling out from beneath a large boulder, sustaining a couple of cottonwood trees at the bottom of the ravine. The prospectors made camp at the spring as the Native American guide gestured to the west and simply said, "Busca," hunt. He then laid down on the ground, rolled a cigarette, and promptly ignored the Italians, apparently feeling his obligation to them was fulfilled. Enthused by the Native Americans' vague directions, the Italians hurried off to the west. Only a few hundred yards from camp, in a tributary ravine, they spotted an unusual outcropping of dark rock. When they broke off a chunk of the stone, they were amazed to see that it glittered with gold in the fading sunlight. Every new piece they chipped off was thickly laced with the precious yellow metal. The Italians sat down together at the discovery site, awestruck by their fantastic luck and lost in dreams of the fortunes they would make. They stayed there marveling at their gold samples until the sun began to set and darkness drove them back to camp. As they hiked back down the ravine, they found the old Mojave guide snoring by the campfire. The Italians, however, were far too excited to sleep, their minds filled with visions of newfound wealth. At first light, they returned to the outcrop and gathered several sacks worth of rich gold ore and large nuggets that had weathered out of the vein. Once they had all the ore they could carry, the Italians carefully concealed all signs of the outcropping to hide it from any other prospectors who might happen through the area. They sketched out a rough map of the region, including prominent landmarks and a clear depiction of the trail from the Santa Maria to the spring and gold mine. Satisfied with their efforts, they departed the hidden canyon as the sun began to set, planning to travel at night to avoid the searing desert heat and reduce the chances of encountering the Hualapai Native Americans, who were enemies of the Mojave and known to attack intruders in their territory. After an uneventful night of walking, the Italian organ grinders and their guide reached Tres Alamos Springs, where they gratefully made camp for the night. They planned to rise early and make the final push to Wickenburg, the closest frontier settlement, where they could stake their mining claims and gather supplies to begin working the incredibly rich gold deposit they had discovered. But their plans were shattered in the dark hour just before the dawn. The exhausted prospectors were startled out of their sleep by blood-curdling war whoops as Hualapai warriors attacked the camp. In a furious onslaught, the war party slew the old Mojave guide and two of the luckless Italians. The third organ grinder managed to slip away in the chaos, temporarily concealed in a thicket of dense brush. The attack was over as swiftly as it had begun. The Hualapai braves snatched up a few items from the camp and then hastily retreated, apparently concerned that cavalry troopers from nearby Camp Date might have heard the commotion and would soon arrive on the scene. Once he was certain the hostile natives had departed, the surviving Italian crept back into the ravaged camp. In a gesture of respect for his slain comrades, he gathered up their bodies and placed them side by side, piled dry brush over the corpses, and set the makeshift funeral pyre ablaze. He then collected the pouches of rich gold samples the party had mined. As a last step, he penned a brief account of their discovery and placed the note and the map of the gold mine in a small metal box that had once been part of one of the ruined organs. He carefully cached the box under a boulder beside the trail. His final act before departing the sad scene was an odd one. He released the Italians' 3 trained monkeys into the wilderness by the spring. The little capuchin monkeys scampered off into the rocks, doomed to either perish in the desert or somehow adapt and survive on their own. Carrying the heavy bags of gold-laced quartz, the heartbroken but determined organ grinder set out across the desert alone, aiming for the tiny village of Wickenburg. But the rigors of the trail, the searing summer heat, and his meager water supply soon took their toll. 2 days after the Hualapai attack, a Mexican teamster named Francisco Gonzalez was driving his wagon from the Weaver Creek mines towards Wickenburg. As he rolled down the track, he spotted a figure lying face down in the sand a short distance ahead. Gonzalez halted his team and hurried over to investigate. He found the unfortunate Italian sprawled on the desert floor, barely clinging to life and still clutching the sacks of gold ore in his hands. Gonzalez gently loaded the dying man into his wagon and gave him water. The organ grinder briefly revived and, in broken Spanish, he gasped out the story of the lost mine and the Apache attack to Gonzalez. But the ordeal had been too much. He succumbed to his injuries and perished before the wagon rolled into Wickenburg. And that, according to Old Bill Bear, is the story of the Lost Organ Grinder's Ledge, a tale of tragedy, betrayal, and a fortune in gold that remains hidden to this day. The sole surviving Italian took the secret of the mine's location to his grave, leaving behind only the tantalizing rumor of the fabulous strike. Treasure hunters and prospectors have scoured the canyons and arroyos north of the Santa Maria River in search of the gold-laced outcropping for more than a century, but the ledge has never been found. Deep in the rugged wilderness of Arizona, amidst the towering pines and rocky crags of the Mazatzal Mountains, lies a mystery that has endured for over a century. It is the tale of the lost Tonto Apache gold mine, a source of incredibly rich gold ore that has captivated the imaginations of prospectors, treasure hunters, and adventurers alike. The story is one of bravery, tragedy, and the enduring allure of hidden wealth waiting to be discovered in the wild places of the Old West. The tale begins in the year 1865, in the aftermath of the American Civil War. With the conflict over, the United States government turned its attention to the western frontier, seeking to establish control over the vast, untamed lands that stretched from the Mississippi River to the Pacific Ocean. As part of this effort, the government established a network of military outposts across the region, including Fort McDowell, located some 35 miles northeast of present-day Phoenix, Arizona, on the west bank of the Verde River. Not long after Fort McDowell was established, the government decided to build a military road that would cross the rugged Mazatzal Mountains and descend into the remote Tonto Basin. This was a wild and untamed region, home to the fierce Tonto Apache tribe, who had long resisted the encroachment of white settlers and soldiers into their ancestral lands. To help maintain control over the Tonto Apache, especially a renegade band led by the notorious Chief Del Shea, the military set up a substation called Camp Reno at the foot of Reno Pass. For several years, this small outpost served as a base of operations for soldiers tasked with keeping the peace in the region and preventing the Apache from launching raids against settlers and miners. The establishment of Fort McDowell and Camp Reno had a significant impact on the Tonto Apache. With the constant presence of soldiers in the area, the Apache warriors began to venture down from their mountain strongholds more frequently, seeking to trade with the white men for supplies they needed, such as tobacco and other goods. It was during these trading sessions that the soldiers and the few prospectors who made their headquarters at the fort and the camp began to take notice of something remarkable. The Apache were bringing with them pieces of incredibly rich gold quartz, the likes of which had never been seen before in the region. The sight of this gold ore, with its veins of pure, gleaming metal, never failed to cause a stir among the soldiers and the prospectors. Speculation ran rampant about the source of this fabulous wealth. Some believed that the Apache had discovered a secret mine of unimaginable richness hidden away in the rugged hills and canyons of the Tonto Basin. However, despite the tantalizing clues and the allure of the gold, few of the soldiers or prospectors dared to venture out in search of the mine. The Apache were still a formidable presence in the region, and they jealously guarded their secrets. Anyone caught trespassing in their territory risked being attacked or killed by the fierce warriors. In 1870, the military made the decision to abandon Camp Reno and consolidate its forces at Fort McDowell on the Verde River. As the troops made their way down from the mountains, they encountered two young soldiers who had just been discharged from the army. These two men, whose names have been lost to history, were armed with .50 caliber rifles, a plentiful supply of ammunition, and enough provisions to last them several months in the wilderness. When questioned by the officers from Camp Reno, the soldiers revealed that they were headed into the wild country around Mount Ord, to the northeast of Fort McDowell, in search of the legendary Tonto Apache gold mine. The officers were shocked by the audacity of the two soldiers. They warned them of the grave dangers they would face, venturing into Apache territory on such a mission. The warriors, they said, would shoot the soldiers on sight if they were caught anywhere near the hidden mine. But the two soldiers were not to be dissuaded. They shouldered their rifles and set off into the brush-covered hills of the Ord Range, their hearts full of hope. As the soldiers made their way into the wilderness, the officers from Camp Reno could only watch them go, shaking their heads at the folly of youth and the allure of gold. Years passed, and no word ever emerged from the rugged hills and canyons to indicate the fate of the two soldiers. The Apache, under the leadership of the legendary warrior Geronimo and other famous chiefs, continued to raid ranches and mining camps throughout the region, defying the best efforts of the military to subdue them. It wasn't until 1886, after years of bloodshed and conflict, that the Apache were finally rounded up and forced onto reservations, their days of raiding and resistance at an end. But even then, the fate of the two soldiers who had ventured into the Mount Ord country remained a mystery, their names forgotten and their disappearance unexplained. 5 years later, in 1891, a clue to the soldiers' fate finally emerged. Two sheepherders, driving their flocks down from the high country, stumbled upon a grim scene on a rocky ridge on the northern slopes of Mount Ord. There, scattered among the boulders and the scrub brush, lay 5 skeletons, bleached white by the sun and picked clean by scavengers. 2 of the skeletons were clad in the tattered remnants of military uniforms. As the sheepherders investigated the scene, they found other clues that shed light on the identity of the dead. Empty shells from a .50 caliber rifle lay scattered in the gravel, and an examination of the teeth and hair of the skeletons confirmed that 2 of the victims had been white men, while the other 3 had been Native Americans. The sheepherders realized that they had stumbled upon the remains of the 2 soldiers who had gone in search of the Tonto Apache gold mine, and the 3 warriors who had fought and died alongside them in a desperate battle on the slopes of Mount Ord. But there was one more discovery that sent a shiver of excitement through the sheepherders. As they searched the area around the skeletons, they came upon a large piece of white quartz, its surface literally covered in a vein of bright, gleaming gold. The specimen was unlike anything the sheepherders had ever seen before. It measured about 3 inches long and 2 inches wide, and it was estimated that at least a third of its mass was pure gold. At the time, a man named Henry Hart, who lived in the nearby town of Chandler, Arizona, had a chance to examine the specimen, and he later described it to others as being one of the richest pieces of gold ore he had ever laid eyes on. To the sheepherders and to Hart, the discovery of the gold ore near the skeletons could mean only one thing. The 2 soldiers had indeed found the legendary Tonto Apache mine, and they had been on their way back to civilization with a sample of its incredible wealth when they were attacked by the Apache warriors and killed in a desperate fight to the death. The story of the lost Tonto Apache gold mine and the fate of the 2 soldiers who had given their lives in search of it quickly spread throughout the region. Prospectors and treasure hunters, their imaginations fired by the tale of the incredibly rich ore, set out into the mountains in droves, determined to find the lost mine and claim its riches for themselves. But despite decades of searching, no one was ever able to locate the source of the Apache gold. Yet the legend of the mine persisted, passed down from generation to generation as a reminder of the incredible wealth that lay hidden in the hills and canyons of Arizona, waiting for someone brave enough or lucky enough to find it. Even in later times, the tale of the Tonto Apache gold continued to captivate the imaginations of those who heard it. In the years after the sheepherders made their grim discovery on the slopes of Mount Ord, there had been occasional reports of Apache wood haulers bringing pieces of incredibly rich gold quartz into the towns of Phoenix and Scottsdale, their eyes gleaming with the same fever that had driven the 2 soldiers to their doom so many years before. And so the mystery of the Tonto Apache gold mine remains unsolved to this day. a tantalizing puzzle that has never been fully unraveled. Somewhere in the rugged hills and canyons of Arizona, there may still lie a fortune in gold, waiting for someone to claim it for their own. But even if the mine is never found, its legend will endure, a reminder of a time when the West was still wild and untamed, and when brave men and women risked everything in the pursuit of their dreams. It is a story that speaks to the deepest yearnings of the human heart, the desire for wealth, for adventure, and for a place in the annals of history. Welcome to another Southwest desert legend of lost gold. Today we delve into the captivating story of the Big Antelope Placer Mine, a legendary deposit of gold said to eclipse the riches found at the famous Rich Hill site. Join us as we unravel the threads of this enduring mystery that has tantalized prospectors and treasure seekers for over a century. Our story begins in the early 1860s, a time when the western frontier was alive with rumors of vast, untapped wealth waiting to be discovered. At the bustling riverfront settlement of La Paz on the Colorado River, Native Americans would arrive to trade their gold for supplies, often speaking in hushed tones of even greater riches lying to the east. These tantalizing whispers reached the ears of two seasoned frontiersmen, Captain Pauline Weaver and Major A.H. Peoples. Intrigued by the prospects of a major gold strike, they assembled an expedition to investigate the Native Americans' claims. Several days after departing from the mines at La Paz, Weaver and Peoples' party made camp at the base of a towering mountain just north of present-day Wickenburg. As fate would have it, some of their horses wandered off during the night. The following morning, a Mexican member of the group was dispatched to track down the errant animals. Seeking a vantage point to survey the surrounding terrain, the Mexican scaled the nearby mountain. Upon reaching the summit, an astonishing sight greeted him. There, scattered across the barren bedrock of a small basin atop the peak, lay a vast array of gold nuggets, glinting in the early morning sun. The ground was blanketed with a fortune in gold, ripe for the taking. The discovery atop what came to be known as Rich Hill ignited a frenzied gold rush. It is said that the placer operations at Rich Hill yielded an astounding $20 million worth of gold, a staggering sum for the time. Many of the nuggets were massive, with some valued at $500 to $600 each, and a few even exceeding that amount. Prospectors often found these sizable nuggets wedged beneath the large granite boulders strewn across the mountainside. Tales of the wealth extracted from Rich Hill spread far and wide. One miner by the name of Johnson is recorded as having crossed the Colorado River at Yuma with $60,000 worth of nuggets loaded onto 2 pack mules. Johnson claimed to have mined the gold at Rich Hill and was making his way to California, accompanied by a company of soldiers to guard against the outlaws and hostile Native Americans who roamed the wild and untamed land. As the miners toiled away at Rich Hill, the local Native Americans watched with amusement. They laughed at the prospectors for expending so much effort gathering what the natives considered to be mere trifles. The Native Americans spoke of another mountain, known to them as Big Antelope, located only a short distance from Rich Hill in the same region. There, they claimed, the nuggets were not only more abundant but also significantly larger in size. However, the lure of the gold at hand proved too strong for the miners to resist. They remained at Rich Hill, extracting millions upon millions of dollars worth of the precious metal in one of the greatest gold rushes the West had ever seen. It would be years before the search for the fabled Big Antelope placer would begin in earnest. The hunt for Big Antelope gained momentum when a local black ranch hand named Ben, who worked for A.H. Peoples on his spread in Peoples Valley, caught wind of the tale. A Native American who had been loitering around the ranch recounted the story to Ben. After much cajoling, Ben persuaded the Native American to guide him to the Big Antelope Country. When the unlikely pair arrived at Sycamore Springs, the Native American informed Ben that they were in close proximity to the gold. He advised the ranch hand to commence his search, as a tribal superstition prevented the native from leading Ben directly to the source. The Native American believed that revealing the exact location would incur the wrath of the gods or result in his execution at the hands of his own people. As he rested by the springs, Ben scoured the surrounding hills for 3 days, driven by the native man's insistence that the elusive treasure was near at hand. Alas, despite his determined efforts, Ben failed to uncover any trace of the gold. Discouraged and empty-handed, the two men had no choice but to return to the ranch, where the Native American promptly vanished and Ben resumed his duties. Months later, when the enigmatic Native American resurfaced at the ranch, Ben seized the opportunity and hired him for another expedition into the untamed wilderness around Sycamore Springs. This time, however, Ben had the foresight to inform his employer, Mr. Peoples, of his intentions. He requested that a search party be dispatched to Sycamore Springs if he failed to return within a specified time frame. Weeks passed, and when Ben did not return as agreed, Peoples organized a rescue mission. Upon reaching Sycamore Springs, the search party made a grim discovery: the lifeless body of Ben. The Native American guide was nowhere to be found and was never seen or heard from again. Speculation swirled about the circumstances surrounding Ben's demise. Many believed that he had indeed located the fabled gold, but paid the ultimate price when the Native American, gripped by the fear of retribution from the gods or his tribesmen for revealing the secret, took matters into his own hands. The body of the ill-fated ranch hand was brought back to Peoples' ranch, where it was laid to rest beneath a mound of stones. In the years that followed, the herd of majestic antelope that gave Big Antelope Mountain its name gradually disappeared. Yet, the legend of the Big Antelope Placer Mine endured, drawing countless treasure hunters and adventurers into the forbidding landscape. Scores of hopeful prospectors have combed the hills and valleys surrounding Sycamore Springs, each dreaming of unearthing the vast riches said to dwarf those of Rich Hill. But to this day, the precise location of the mine remains one of the West's most enduring and tantalizing mysteries, a secret seemingly lost to the annals of history. The tale of the Big Antelope Placer Mine serves as a testament to the allure of hidden wealth and the lengths to which people will go in pursuit of their dreams. It is a story woven from the threads of history, tragedy, and the indomitable spirit of the Old West. While the truth behind the legend may never be fully unraveled, the romance and mystery surrounding the lost mine continue to captivate the imaginations of dreamers and adventurers alike. As we bring this episode of Southwest Desert to a close, we invite you to ponder the many secrets still lurking in the rugged landscapes that once formed the untamed frontier. The Big Antelope Placer Mine may be but one of countless treasures waiting to be discovered by those daring enough to seek them out. Join us next time as we explore another captivating tale of the Southwest Desert. Welcome to the Southwest Desert. In today's episode, we'll be diving into the intriguing story of the Lost Frenchman gold mine, a legendary treasure that has captured the imagination of prospectors and adventurers for over 150 years. Our story begins in the spring of 1867 in the small frontier town of Yuma, Arizona. The dusty streets were abuzz with excitement when two French prospectors rode into town, their pack mules laden with a fortune in rough gold. The men unloaded the precious cargo in front of the W.B. Hooper and Company store, revealing chunks of gold that had been hammered out of rusty quartz rock. Bits of the reddish stone still clung to some of the larger gold pieces, hinting at an incredibly rich vein hidden somewhere out in the vast Sonoran desert. After purchasing additional mules and supplies for their next prospecting expedition, the two Frenchmen still had a staggering $8,000 left on deposit at the Hooper store, a massive sum in those days. The successful strike captured the attention and imagination of Yuma's residents. After resting for several days and no doubt celebrating their good fortune, the Frenchmen packed up their newly supplied outfit and headed off into the desert, this time in the direction of the imposing Eagle Tail Mountains to the east. News of the discovery spread like wildfire through the small town. Many of Yuma's able-bodied men hastily gathered their own supplies and set off to follow the French prospectors, hoping to either convince them to reveal the source of their golden bounty or to track them to the location themselves. However, the Frenchmen proved elusive, and their pursuers lost track of them on the very first night out in the wilderness. The trail went cold, and the determined Yuma men were forced to abandon their chase and return home empty-handed. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and months into years with no further sign of the two Frenchmen. They were never seen alive again, and no additional information about their activities or the location of their mine ever surfaced. The $8,000 they had deposited at the Hooper store remained untouched, waiting for its owners to return and claim it. The money was still there 20 years later. The fate of the Frenchmen remained unknown for years, but eventually a grim discovery was made that shed some light on what may have happened to them. Some years after their disappearance, two skeletons were found in the mountains to the east of Yuma. There was no way to definitively identify the remains, but many old-timers and desert rats believe the bleached bones were all that was left of the ill-fated French prospectors. Had they fallen victim to bandits, hostile Indians, or simply the unforgiving nature of the harsh desert? No one knew for sure, but their demise only added to the growing legend of the lost Frenchman mine. In 1873, the mystery deepened when the famous frontiersman King Woolsey and his band of Indian fighters made a stunning discovery while riding through Tehachapi Pass. The men were on the trail of Apache raiders, hoping to collect the generous bounties offered for their scalps. As they navigated the rugged terrain, they came upon a well-marked trail leading through the pass. Following it, Woolsey and his men stumbled upon a large pile of rich gold ore, carelessly left out in the open as if waiting for someone to return and collect it. News of Woolsey's find eventually made its way back to civilization, and some years later an expedition was mounted to locate the source of the ore and hopefully uncover the lost mine. The party managed to locate the pile Woolsey had described and hauled the ore back to Yuma, but despite their best efforts, they could not rediscover the mine it had come from. More tantalizing clues and strange discoveries related to the Frenchmen and their mine cropped up over the years, each one adding to the legend but failing to reveal the location of the golden treasure. In 1889, two brothers named Lincoln and Fowler were prospecting in the remote Harquahala region when they stumbled upon an old mine working in the crumbling remains of a camp. Upon closer inspection, they determined that the long-abandoned diggings had been made on a rich gold vein, but only scattered bits of ore remained, the main deposit having been worked out by parties unknown. The Fowler brothers could only speculate about who had mined the pocket. Had it been the lost Frenchman or perhaps another party drawing ever closer to relocating their fabulous discovery? A vague second-hand account emerged that seemed to shed more light on the Frenchman's activities. The famed prospector A.H. Peoples Renowned for his successes at the rich La Paz and Rich Hill diggings along the Colorado River, claimed that in 1868 he had encountered a party of 3 Frenchmen working a claim in the Harquahala country. According to Peoples, the Frenchmen seemed to be doing well, but on his return trip to Yuma, he found their camp burned and came upon the skeleton of what appeared to be a white man. Suspicion fell on a band of Maricopa Native Americans known to be in the area at the time. Peoples' account raised questions about the number of Frenchmen involved and whether multiple parties had discovered and worked the lost mine over the years. Experienced prospectors at the time found it curious that miners would transport rich ore all the way from the Harquahala area to Tehachapi Pass, as the Hassayampa River presented a much closer and more practical place to process it using arrastras. This incongruity cast some doubt on whether all the French prospector accounts were related to the same strike, or if there were multiple lost mines waiting to be rediscovered. Over the ensuing decades, the Lost Frenchman mine took on an almost mythical status among the prospectors, treasure hunters, and desert rats of the Southwest. Many men devoted years of their lives to scouring the sun-blasted hills and canyons in search of the golden vein, focusing much of their efforts on the Tehachapi Pass area where Woolsey's men had found the strange pile of high-grade ore. One of the most intriguing tales that added to the legend involves an old prospector named George Sears, a man who played a significant role in the early development of the rich copper deposits at Ajo and the Gunsight mine. Known to carry around a 25-pound chunk of rich, rusty gold quartz, Sears claimed he had definitive proof that the Lost Frenchman mine was located in the Eagle Tail Mountains. According to Sears, he stumbled upon a clue to the mine's location by pure chance during a prospecting trip from Phoenix to Ajo. Deciding to take a shortcut through the imposing Eagle Tail Range, Sears made a night camp in a small depression along a wash after a heavy rain. The next morning, as he prepared breakfast, he noticed his hobbled burros drinking from a small puddle that had collected in what appeared to be an old prospect hole. A few bits of loose rock lay scattered on the dump pile below the shallow diggings. Thinking little of it at the time, Sears filled his canteen from the puddle and, needing to balance the load in his pack boxes, scooped up some of the rusty quartz chunks and tossed them in with his grub stake. As his food supplies dwindled during the remainder of the trek, he would periodically stop to gather more nondescript rocks to keep his packs even, thinking nothing of the first few bits of quartz he had collected. Upon finally reaching his destination at the Gunsight mine east of Ajo, Sears made a startling discovery. As he unpacked his gear, he examined the rocks he had loaded first during his stop in the Eagle Tails, and found that the rusty chunks were shot through with veins of pure gold. He had unwittingly stumbled upon a surface outcropping of incredibly rich ore, but in the vastness of the desert, he wasn't entirely sure he could retrace his steps and locate the lost prospecting pit. While Sears never found that particular Eagle Tail outcrop again, he kept the rich quartz samples as proof of the mountain's golden potential. Whether his chance discovery had any connection to the legendary Lost Frenchman strike is impossible to say, but the ore bore a striking resemblance to the samples that had set off the original rush and to the pile Woolsey and his men discovered years later in Tehachapi Pass. And so the legend of the Lost Frenchman mine lives on, a golden thread woven through the colorful history of the Arizona Territory. In the years since the story first electrified the wild mining camps along the Colorado and Gila rivers, arguments have raged about whether the various tales all relate to the same incredibly rich strike, or if there are actually several legendary lost mines waiting to be rediscovered out in the sun-drenched wilds of the Southwest. Today, the mine's lore continues to captivate the imagination of prospectors, treasure hunters, and desert adventurers. Many believe that the Frenchman's rich vein still lies hidden out there somewhere in the rugged mountains and canyons, its secret location a puzzle waiting to be solved by some lucky soul with the right combination of skill, perseverance, and perhaps a bit of frontier serendipity. Be sure to join us again for another tale from the Southwest Desert. I hope you enjoyed these lost gold stories. Please leave a like or comment. For further desert adventures, hit the subscribe button. Happy trails!